you could buy an article in some second, third, fourth tier publication. Um, if you do that, here is, I think, what you're going to get from it. Nothing. You're going to get nothing from it. And the reason is because if a publication has an audience, they can monetize the audience. If they don't have an audience, they have to monetize you. So you are going to pay to be in a publication that zero people are reading.
All right, what's up, everyone? I'm so excited to have the one and only Jason Feifer on the podcast. Many of you might have known him from Twitter, from all the online spaces, but he is the editor in chief of Entrepreneur Magazine and the host of not one, but two podcasts. Most excitingly, he's about to launch his book out in September. By the time you're listening to this, it might already be out. It's called Build for Tomorrow. So, welcome to the show, Jason.
Thank you for having me.
So you do so many things, right? You're a startup advisor, you're a host of
Yeah.
podcasts, you interview entrepreneurs at every stage of their business. What do the most successful ones have in common, whether it's mindset or whatever it is?
Yes, it's funny. That was the question people kept asking me when I first started, which was so I became editor in chief of Entrepreneur Magazine in 2016, and I had a media background before then. So I worked at Men's Health, Fast Company, Maxim. That was a terrible decision. Some other places, and I kept getting once I became editor in chief, people started treating me differently. They started not understanding me as a media person, but rather as like a authority, which I was not prepared for or used to. And the question that they kept asking me, as you just said, was, "What are the qualities of the most successful people that you meet?" And I realized something, which is if you listen to the questions that people ask you, you realize what they're really doing is telling you what they think your value is to them. The question is basically, hey, here's how you are valuable to me. And if you listen to that, then what you're really hearing is an opportunity, because if you can fulfill the thing that people think you are valuable to them for, then you know exactly how to serve people. And I thought, well, I better know the answer to this question. So I spent a long time researching it, talking to people, just thinking about it. It was constantly on my mind. And the answer that I came to was adaptability. The most successful people are adaptable. You just see it. You see it in ways large and small, that people who get into entrepreneurship or anything else with this understanding that they should have a plan and also have a plan to abandon the plan, and that they are kind of constantly revising what it is they do and the way in which they do it, those are the people who get ahead. And the people who fall behind, I think, are the ones who either are afraid to shift into something that feels unfamiliar, or too anchored to the thing that they already knew, even as that thing declines in value. And this separation just takes place, and I became kind of obsessed with what it is that enables the people who are adaptable to adapt.
Well, I love that you said that because I really think that's the resilience, the adaptability, the ability to wear many different hats. I've seen it myself, so I really can validate what you're saying. Cannot wait to dive into the book. Now, I want to talk about
Thank you.
all things journalism. Obviously, you've worked on the media side. You probably received, I don't know, hundreds of pitches in your entire life. How do you think
Oh, hundreds. I mean, like tens to hundreds of thousands of pitches. I mean,
Yes.
I get probably 300 pitches a day. I mean, my inbox is stuffed.
We could make a YouTube show just with you reading your subject lines, I'm sure. That you
Oh
write.
yeah. Oh, you totally could. There was a great one today about it was like NFT influencer releases his first rap on TikTok. And I was like, there's just every single part of this is not interesting to me. Like every part of this sentence is uninteresting. Anyway, yes, it's hilarious what flows into the inbox.
I mean, I would just love the peek inside. Now, you said that's uninteresting. Why don't you tell me very broad strokes what is interesting to you?
So I need to break that into two parts, because there's me personally, what is interesting to me in the world, and then there is what are the things that I'm looking for Entrepreneur Magazine. And I think let's start with Entrepreneur Magazine, because here's the thing. If you're pitching a publication, what you need to know more than anything else is you need to know how they serve their audience. I always tell entrepreneurs, and this is not meant to be an insult, but a reporter doesn't care about you. They just don't. It's not their job to care about you. It's their job to care about their reader. Right? So what you need to do is understand how they are serving their reader and how you can be valuable to that mission. Because if you do that, then they will write about you and that will be of benefit to you, obviously. But the reason that they're going to do it, the reason the reporter is going to do it is not because they're here to serve you. I mean, Gloria, I get so many emails from people who treat me like I sell hamburgers, which is to say they think I'm a service provider. How can I get a feature in Entrepreneur Magazine? How can I get a hamburger from your hamburger shop? That's exactly what it feels like the same thing. I'm not a service provider, right? Like my job isn't to give people press. My job is to serve my readers. So the more you understand that, the more you can understand how to pitch yourself. So to your question, how do I select the stories? What are the things that are interesting?
Yeah, I
My
love
philosophy Yeah. My philosophy is this. I don't believe that readers of Entrepreneur Magazine are all that interested in reading a magazine. I believe that what they're interested in is building something. They are building something for themselves. They're building something for their community, and they need insight on how to do that. The magazine just happens to be a really good vehicle to deliver information to them. And therefore, I am not interested in anything that doesn't help their mission. So we tell stories of people in business, but when we do, we're doing it because that person has figured something out. They have made some kind of counterintuitive decision or something that's surprising and really smart. They did something, they learned something that other people in other industries could appreciate too. Like the to me, the greatest stories that we run are ones that I get on stage in front of 1,000 entrepreneurs who are doing 1,000 different things, and I tell this story, and every single person in the audience is like, "Oh, that's so smart," or "Oh, that helps me think about my own business in some way." Those are the stories that I love. So that's what you need to dig into. I don't care about your success metrics. I don't care about your quirky background. I don't care about the really super interesting thing that you do. And the reason for that is because that's not useful to other people. What decision did you make? What smart thing did you think through? That's what's interesting to other people.
right. So would you say it's not so much about whether or not you have a lot of revenue or that you know all these fancy people? It could be just a nobody, a small town hero, right, pitching you.
Totally.
Can you give
I
me an
love
example?
small town heroes.
Can you
Yeah,
example of that, of someone who literally is like a nobody who does not have any connection to VC, maybe is an immigrant to this country, but you were fascinated by his story and gave him or her that platform to tell that story?
sure. So there are like there are so many of these, and I end up just repeating them every time anybody asks me a question because these little tiny stories and these little tiny decisions, I think, ultimately come to represent bigger, broader ways of thinking. So I'll just give you one. There's a woman named Lena. She has a wig store in Baltimore called Lena's Wigs. And Lena used to operate that store as a storefront. You know what a storefront is. People walk in, they shop. And she had a person on staff to greet all the people who would walk in. And then the pandemic arrived, and Lena could not operate her storefront in the way in which she used to. And she does not know what to do. And she comes up with the only thing she can think of is not some like radical, insane idea. It is, in fact, something that she had thought of before, but had discarded as something that was not right for her business, which is appointment only. She was going to operate her business appointment only, which means doors are closed. You cannot walk in off the street. You have to make an appointment. Now, the reason she didn't do that before is because she thought, well, too much friction, right? Like you don't want to create barriers for your your potential consumer to come in and do business with you. So she had never done it before, but now she did it. And to her great surprise and delight, revenue went up and profits went up and consumer happiness went up. Why? Well, because here's the thing. As it turns out, the people who were walking in off of the street into Lena's Wigs were not consumers of hers. They were interested in wigs. They were curious. They were going to look around, but they weren't going to buy a wig because they're not the person who buys wigs. The people who buy wigs from Lena's Wigs are generally buying because of a religious or medical issue. They are people who do not want to be trying on wigs with a whole bunch of rando people who walked in off the street just loitering around. They would love to make an appointment, would love to have a private experience. And so here, by being forced into this change, Lena was actually able to identify and serve her true customer and then just push to the side the customer who was just spending her resources because they were spending her resources. Lena was paying a person to greet these people, to come in off the street and not buy wigs. That was not a good spend of money. So now Lena doesn't have to do that anymore. And anyway, the reason why I love this story is because this isn't just a story about one wig shop and one decision that was made. This is what I've come to think of as a great example of reconsidering the impossible. That when change comes along, and this is the whole point of the book Build for Tomorrow that I've written. When change comes along, it shoves us outside of our comfort zone, outside of the little box of ideas that we thought were good and only worth considering. And instead, we are forced to try things that we had discarded before. So the greatest ideas aren't things that were just weren't beamed down from Mars. Supernatural force did not create them. The greatest ideas are sometimes the ones that we ourselves said, too difficult, too hard, not reasonable. And Lena was forced to reconsider the impossible, and it completely transformed her business. And those are the kinds of stories I love. I love those stories. Lena just told me that out of nowhere. She just emailed me. I think she follows me on some social platform, and I had like put out some question about like who's made a big change that they didn't expect would be to their benefit. And she wrote me and told me that little story, and I have repeated it for 2 years. I love, and I put it in the magazine too. I love those kinds of things, and I hear them all the time.
So it wasn't a fancy PR person who was like, to whom it can,
Nope,
she literally pitched you herself.
it was Lena. It was an email from Lena.
So now in terms of the actual pitching, first of all, that's so inspiring. I can't wait to hear other stories in your book. I'm sure there's a lot of really good stories.
Thank you.
In terms of the actual writing, somebody who's listening might have a story just like Lena, right? But they
Yeah.
are so petrified of
Hmm.
sending you that email. So how can they put everything that they want to put in the email in a way that's appeasing to you, that's a part of the solution and not too pushy?
So I get it. I was once very uncomfortable doing self promotion. I know where you're coming from. I would encourage you to reframe it in your mind, which is to say, do not think of a pitch about yourself as a piece of self promotion. Instead, think of it as you have learned something, other people can benefit from it. You are doing your service as an entrepreneur in trying to get that message to other people, right? And if you are truly writing an email with that spirit in mind, then it will be better received. Really, the problem is when you just email out and you just say, I'm killing it, and I think that everybody should know about me. Or also, like a version of this that I think falls short is when people reach out to me and they'll just say something like, um, I have been very successful, and I want others to be inspired by my story. But that by itself is not inspiring. I just have to tell you that, like, just telling your story so that it can be promotional to you is not inspiring to others. Dig deep, right? Like, I am sure that if you pulled Lena aside and you said, Lena, the editor in chief of Entrepreneur Magazine is going to tell a story about you for the next 2 years. What would you like that story to be? I'm sure that her answer would be, I have great customer service. I have fantastic wigs. I serve people who need, right? Like, it would have been a self promotional thing instead of this like story about the appointment only and like the whole thing. But the appointment only story is the one that's useful to other people. So zero in on that. Think about what other people need from you, not what you need from other people. And then as soon as you do that, you will have an idea of how to tell your story in a way that's going to be useful to other people. And it really should make you feel good about trying to get that message out.
Yeah, I think that's really the why people start businesses. But I don't know if it's the marketing world or the ads, get so far away from that message that it becomes so hard to get to that why. Why do you think it is so hard for founders to reframe their message in a way that you just said makes total sense?
I think it's because we are very naturally associated with the output of our work. Um, we think primarily about what we do, because that is the thing that generally defines the grind of our daily lives. I make a widget. I got to think. every moment of the day about how to get this widget out, how to make sure that the people are making the widget, how to make sure that the machine is making the widget, how to ship the widget. And so if somebody were to come up to you and say, "Well, what do you do?" You'd be like, "I make a widget." Right? But that is not really the reason why you do it. And you need to drill down. I mean, Gloria, I've come up with this little this little exercise. It really helped me years ago because I used to do this for myself. I started as a newspaper reporter. I identified as a newspaper reporter. Come up to me at a party. What do you do? I'm a newspaper reporter, and then I realized that being a newspaper is actually kind of sucked. It's really unstable industry. It wasn't for me. I'm glad it's for other people, but it wasn't for me. And but if I think about myself as a newspaper reporter and then I don't have a newspaper job, then what am I? Nothing. So and then I started talking to entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs have this totally different way of thinking where they have identified this core thing that they do that is not associated with the literal output of their work. Um, the CEO of Foodsters, I was talking to him once about this major change that happened in his business. Foodsters is this company that make baking mixes and other sweets, and Sarah Michelle Gellar is a co-founder. And anyway, they went through this big change, and I had asked Greg, the CEO, if the change freaked him out, and he said no, because and this is, I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was like, he was like, no, because the mission of our company is to bring joy to people through sweet baked goods, right? It's not, the mission of our company is to make chocolate cake baking mixes, right? Because if sales of chocolate cake baking mixes go down, then suddenly you're adrift. Bring joy to people with sweet baked goods. That you could be doing that in any number of ways. So anyway, here's my exercise. I'm going to run you through the same scenario 3 times with a slight difference each time. Scenario number 1. Gloria, you want to play along? I'm gonna pose it to you. Somebody comes up to you at a party and they ask what you do. What do you do?
Well, I can give the answer you don't like, which is I am a PR coach and I'm a podcast.
Yeah, great. But that is the answer I don't like. But that's the answer that you would give, and that's a perfectly reasonable answer, right? When I was a magazine reporter, or I was a newspaper reporter, I would have said, somebody comes up, I would have said, I'm a newspaper.
Hmm.
I'm all confused. I said I was a newspaper editor, a newspaper reporter. Can I just note, it's 3 p.m. My toddler is home. It's been a crazy day. I don't know what I'm talking about. Anyway, you can hear it. So I would have said, I'm a newspaper reporter. What do? I go out and I report the news. Okay, great. So now what have we done? What we have done is we have talked about our tasks. We have been asked what we do, and we talk about our tasks. So I'm now going to run the scenario again. Somebody comes up to you at a party and they ask what you do. You can't talk about your tasks.
Hmm.
Anything that you said, you cannot talk about. Now, I think what you would naturally do is you would talk about your skills. So, Gloria, hey, great party. What do you do?
Well, I instill confidence in founders to help them
Great.
rewrite their narrative so that their little side hustle is a legitimate, credible business.
I love it. Um, I would have said, well, I go out and gather information, and then I process that information in a way that's useful to other people. Um, and that's great. Those are our skills. Now we're going to do it one more time. What are we doing? We're peeling away the onion here, right? Because we so instinctively relate and identify with our tasks, and we forget why we are doing it in the first place, that we need to like just kind of set it on the table and then set it aside. So somebody comes up to you at a party and they ask what you do. You can't talk about your tasks, you can't talk about your skills. At this point, what's left to talk about? I think that what's left to talk about is your core, your why, the thing that is so deep inside you that it fueled you to develop the schools. It fueled you to develop the skills that enable you to do the tasks. Um, Not everyone is going to have a easy answer to this. I don't know if you do. I would suggest coming up with an answer that's like a sentence, like just a few words, really, really so core to you that it could fuel a dozen different jobs. I have an answer for myself that I came to after a long period of time. Do you have an answer for yourself?
I do. I do.
What is it?
Helping elevate the stories of founders of color so that they can be seen, heard, and valued.
Amazing. Amazing. What's so great about that is that there are so many ways that you could do that. Like
Mhm.
you do it in a couple ways right now, but if you woke up tomorrow and for some reason, like all the ways that you do it right now are were not available to you anymore, if podcasting disappeared from the planet, you could find other ways to accomplish the
Yeah.
thing that you just said. Similarly, the thing that I came to was I tell stories in my own voice. I tell stories, not magazine stories, not podcast stories, not newspaper stories, in my own voice. I'm setting the terms for how I communicate. I'm not telling somebody else's voice. I am not serving somebody else's mission. I did that earlier in my career. I'm not interested in it anymore. And just doing this kind of exercise, just having that clarity of purpose that you just expressed, I think enables us to navigate moments of change because we realize that when change comes, what it really impacts is simply the output of our work. It means that maybe we can't do the thing that we do in the same way, but that doesn't negate the core value of what we do. And the more that we can identify what that is, the more we can find endless ways to express it.
Yeah, I agree. And if you look at the thought leaders, if you will, right? We don't know what they sell. Like a lot of people talking on stage, I don't know what product they have or what their business model is. It's really about what they do and kind of their why, right? If look at
Yeah.
Simon Sinek or whatever, I don't know what he sells, right? Or even you, like I have no idea. I just know your values
Yeah.
and your mission and whether or not I'm aligned with that. And obviously,
Yeah.
now I know that I am. So I love what you said about that. I want to talk a little bit about journalism because we live in
Mhm.
the age of pay to play, of paying an influencer $5,000 to wear a sweatshirt. Um, it's so blurry now, right? There's so many
Yeah.
magazines. So where do you think journalism is headed towards with all this kind of changes?
It's a good question. I don't pretend to know the future, but my general belief on how things evolve is that nothing ever gets wholesale replaced. You take the best of the old and the best of the new, and you eventually combine them into something. Um, I mean, I am disappointed to see the degree to which I think a lot of legacy media brands are. I think basically selling off the only thing that they have left, which is their reputation, and not selling it off in a way in which you could buy it and promote yourself, right? Like there's a lot of confusion which we should talk about where people wonder are stories in Entrepreneur or other major media outlets paid for. The answer is no, they are not paid for. But you know a lot of media brands, Entrepreneur included, just to be frank, have kind of let the walls down about who can write for the publications, with the idea that, well, this is now like a kind of community platform, and any, as long as you pass a kind of verification, you can write, and that brings a lot of value to people, but it also, I think, really ultimately kind of devalues these brands, which used to be based on really strong focus and curated material. You knew that if you read something in these brands, it was because 10 people looked at it and made sure that it was polished and clean and up to standards. And that's just not something that any brand can keep up when there are like just a bazillion pieces of content being posted online every day, and I worry about that. I just don't think that that's a law. I don't think that that's long term good for the media industry as a whole. But but it is the model right now, and there's you take the good with the bad because certainly there's good with it too. Um, and so what do I think? I think that there will always be a media ecosystem full of noise and full of chaos. That's the media ecosystem that we came from, and it's the one that we're building now, right? I mean, if you look back at the early days of newspapers in the United States of America, what you see is just chaos. You see every city that has like 12 different newspapers, and they're all owned by party men, and they all have completely contradictory information in them, and yet people found a way through, and they found the things that they trusted, and some elevated and became the New York Times, and some became the New York Sun and fell apart into nothingness. And that's just what it'll be, and that's what it'll always be. And I think that right now you are even seeing in the newsletter space, you're seeing really smart, accomplished, smart people. I said smart twice, but that's fine because they're smart, and they are establishing themselves as separate and above a lot of the other noise, and they will become the new standard bearers of people who are trustworthy and who will go out and gather information in a honest way. And the others will, I think, ultimately be seen for what they are. And in the middle will be a lot of noise. That's what it'll be.
I love that you validated that there's always going to be different business models. We live in a capitalist society, but I do think the value of knowing how to pitch yourself, it cannot be understated, right? You can't just hire someone to tell your story. For example, Lena's wigs, Lena knows her stuff more than anyone, right?
Yeah.
So I love that you said that journalism is not dead. You don't need to pay to play. You don't need to hire a fancy PR agency, but really get to your core.
Yeah.
Before we hop
And
off,
actually, yeah, can I just say another thing about you don't need to pay to play? I mean, like, here's the thing. There are pay to play options out there. Typically, like what are they? Well, you could buy an article in some second, third, fourth tier publication. Um, if you do that, here is, I think, what you're going to get from it. Nothing. You're going to get nothing from it. And the reason is because if a publication has an audience, they can monetize the audience. If they don't have an audience, they have to monetize you. So you are going to pay to be in a publication that zero people are reading. I don't see how that's valuable. And then, yes, it is totally true that you might hear some story about how somebody, um, and I'm just purely by example, random example here. I'm not making any accusations, but like somebody paid and they got into Forbes. Okay, well, what was that? I'll tell you what that was. That was not Forbes. That was not somebody at Forbes. What that was probably a bad actor who has become a contributor to Forbes and is somehow sneaking around and getting people to pay them to write about them in Forbes. And someday that is going to be found out, and that stuff is going to get deleted. It has happened at Entrepreneur, and we have deleted. We delete, delete, delete. So that means that you paid somebody who's a jerk, and you got nothing out of it. It's just not worth your time.
yeah, I love what you said about it because, obviously I teach about the organic, right? Because it's so much easier to not do the work and just pay someone. But I love what you said about if they don't have an audience, they're going to monetize you. But if they have built up the audience, which is years or if not decades of
Yeah.
credibility, then they don't need to monetize you. So I love what you said about that because let's be honest, even to this day, like if I open up my Instagram, I get those spam messages all the time. Do you want to get featured in 30 under 30? Like
Oh,
no one's reading
get
that.
it all the time.
Or the best one is, do you want to pay $20,000 to be on a TV show that is going to broadcast at 5 a.m. or 4 a.m. that no one's going to watch, right?
Yes, that is such a thing. That is such a thing, right? You pay to be on like ABC, and so what somebody does is that they'll like film you, and then they'll run it in this tiny market in South Dakota at 4 a.m. And so I guess technically it was on ABC, but zero people saw it, and now you have a video of it that I guess you can put on your website, but it's just garbage.
So before we hop off, do you have any quick tips on people who want to do it the right way? Right. But
Yeah.
they also aren't natural pitch writers. How can they start to consume the news, be a good steward, and then get to the point where they can actually get onto someone like Use Radar?
So the first thing I think that you should do is you should step back and you should ask, what is press for me? Like, what do I need it for? Because that's going to dictate who you're going to reach out to, right? If you are if you're, I don't know, if you're in the consumer product space and your target consumer is a college age woman, you could try to pitch Entrepreneur, because, and this is what people tend to think is when they reach out to me, because they'll always tell me this. They'll be like, well, I want to be an entrepreneur because I'm an entrepreneur. Okay, fine. But if your job is to run your business and the goal that you have right now is actually to drive consumer awareness and to drive sales, then entrepreneur is not your audience. It's just not. You're not going to reach people who are going to buy your product. You need to be reaching Cosmo or Teen Vogue or something like that, right? So you got to think through who your audience is. Why would people pitch entrepreneur? I mean, some of them are because they create products and services for entrepreneurs, but a lot of them actually are the reason that if you and I've had like conversations with people. It's like, why did you pitch me? And the answer is because they're about to go out on a fundraising round, and they want something that they can show investors. That's why. So spend time thinking about what your goal is, then identify your publication, and then you know what? Just spend time trying to see how they write the kind of story that you would be in. Just the other day, I was talking to a guy who runs a snack food company, and his target is millennial moms, and so I said, all right, well, why don't we go to cosmopolitan.com and see how they write about snacks. And so that's what we did. And what we found was that they write about snacks in list format. 17 snacks for the summer or whatever. It's like all that. So great. Now you know. And so now you can, and you see who's writing these stories. So now go check out their work, figure out their email address, and reach out to them. And don't just be like, hey, next time you're running a list about snacks, consider including me, because that puts the work on them. Do some work for them. Maybe you reach out and you're like, hey, I'm in the snack industry. I've seen these really fun trends happening right now that I bet your audience is going to be really into. You should totally do a list on like 17 something 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 something. And my product happens to be fitting that, but also here are four more that I think are really great. Like at that point, the person's like, oh my god, thank you, you've basically just saved me hours of time. And now you're delivering value, and you're telling your story in a way that they tell their story. You're telling I'm all tied up. You're telling your story in a way that the publication is talking to its reader, and as a result, they're going to be far more receptive to your message.
Ooh, you just validate so much. Thank you so much for that. I That's actually exactly how I write a pitch. I have like three bullet points of trends, and maybe the product is one of those three, but I'm not going to talk about selling to the journalist because the journalist is not going to buy your product, you know?
Mm-mm.
So before we and I want to have one more question is you have this book that
Sure.
you've written, you have decades of experience, you've interviewed entrepreneurs in every corner of the globe. Why is your book different than some of the other entrepreneur books that are coming out?
Oh, great question. Um, so my book, it's called Build for Tomorrow, an action plan for embracing change, adapting fast, and future proofing your career. That's very long. I use the subtitle. It's just called Build for Tomorrow. And the reason that it's different, I'd say, is because of this. So first of all, I have access to everybody, to the most accomplished people in the world, and also the Main Street heroes like Lena, who you've never heard of, and I've spent years understanding the patterns of how they work and how they adapt, and then I've married that to this other thing that I've spent years doing, which we didn't really talk about here, but if you find my podcast is called Build for Tomorrow too, which is I've studied the history of innovation. I'm absolutely fascinated by why some of the things that we take for granted today, things like teddy bears and coffee and chess and bicycles, these things were scary when they first came out. They're literally 1907. America had a national moral crisis over the teddy bear. The people were freaking out about the schools were banning teddy bear. Why? The answer is because change is very, very scary. And by studying how today's entrepreneurs navigate change and see opportunity ahead, um, and then by finding the parallels in how the world that we live in was built by people who understood how to navigate change, or at least figured it out along the way. I think what I hope that I've put together is this guidebook on how to change yourself and how to see change as opportunity. I break change down to four phases: panic, adaptation, new normal, and wouldn't go back, and then give these lessons and exercises that I've learned over the years from the smartest people that I've talked to, about how to navigate each of them. And I hope that I've offered something that's really unique. But I guess if anybody listens to this and then reads it, they can be the judge.
One thing about change is, I mean, we're recording this in 2022. I
Yeah,
literally told my friend with what's happening with the government, with abortion rights, with guns, with the war, I almost feel like
yeah,
we've done like 10 years of changes in 6 months. Would you agree that
totally.
the only thing now is change? Change is the new normal, even more now than ever.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. You know, we. I like to say, I like to think that we right now, what we have an opportunity to do is to live in the conscious cycle. Which is to say, change is a cycle. You've gone through many of these before. Like whatever it is that you do right now is the product of you navigating change endless times before, right? Like just the number of times that you changed what it is, who you are and what you do and how you relate to people. All of that produced whatever it is that you have now. And the problem that we have is that at some point we get to a place where we're like, okay, now I've got it and I'm done. And then when change comes along, at that point we say, oh, I can't do this anymore. And so now, as we are all forced into it because the pandemic forced us all into it, now we have this opportunity to monitor the experience, to say this change is disruptive and scary, but also oh my gosh, here are these new opportunities. Oh, here are these new ways of thinking about work. I can't believe that I didn't have this before. And this is now, like I said, the conscious cycle. You can pay attention to this. You can notice what you are doing and the experience that you're having so that the next time it happens, because it will happen again, you can think back and say, I remember it. I remember tracking it. I remember seeing how I experienced it. And I know that there's good on the other side of this one because there's good every single time prior.
Right. And every time you go for it, you get feedback, you get faster, stronger, better. Boom.
You sure do.
How can people find you, connect with you, support you?
So I would love, love, love if you picked up the book Built for Tomorrow. You can also find me at my website, which is jasonpfeifer.com. And if you look at the top right of the website, if you go to jasonpfeifer.com, you will find this little button that says free training, which is a free audio guide that I put together about how to become more adaptable. It's just sort of some of the lessons and tips that I have. It's sort of like a little teaser for the book, so to speak. It was made long before the book, so it's not actually a teaser for the book, but you get the idea. And so I'd love for you to download that because I think it'll give you a little jolt of inspiration, and also it'll enable you to be on my mailing list so that we can stay in touch.
Yes, get on his mailing list, get the book. I can't wait to dive into not only learn about the entrepreneurs we know about, but the Main Street heroes like Lena. So thank you so much for doing what you do and congrats
Thank
again
you.
on the book.
Hey, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you for all the work you do.